Imagine there is an island on Earth where approaching the shore could get you killed, and the government doesn't want you anywhere near it. For centuries, a small community has lived almost completely separated from modern civilization. They don't use the internet, they don't have modern cities, and they have repeatedly rejected attempts by outsiders to contact them. But why? Before we reveal what makes this island so dangerous and mysterious, take a few seconds to subscribe to Beyond Maps and share this with someone who loves discovering places most people don't even know exist. Because this island has a story that sounds almost impossible.
North Sentinel Island is not a place where tourists simply decide to visit. It isn't a hidden resort. It isn't an abandoned island waiting to be explored. It is home to one of the world's most isolated indigenous peoples, the Sentinelese. And the strangest part is that we don't actually know exactly how many people live there. Estimates vary widely because outsiders are not permitted to enter the island, and the Sentinelese have never conducted a population census for the outside world. Press Information Bureau, +1. What we do know is that they live on a small, heavily forested island in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands of India. From above, it can look almost ordinary. Dense green forest, beautiful beaches, surrounded by the blue waters of the Indian Ocean. But cross a certain invisible line around that island, and the rules change completely. The entire island and the surrounding 5-kilometer coastal zone are protected as a tribal reserve under Indian law. Outsiders are prohibited from entering. Press Information Bureau, +1. And there is a very good reason for that.
For thousands of years, the Sentinelese have lived on this island largely separated from the outside world. They hunt. They fish. They gather food from the forest and surrounding waters. They build shelters and use narrow canoes to move through the coastal waters. And despite the popular descriptions you may have heard online, they are not a Stone Age tribe. That's a misleading way to describe a living people. They have adapted to their environment just like every other human society. For example, researchers have observed that the Sentinelese use metal recovered from shipwrecks and other debris that reaches their island. They have even reshaped that metal into tools and arrowheads. Survivalinternational.org. So this isn't a community frozen in some ancient moment of history. It's a living society with its own technology, its own customs, and most importantly, its own decision about who it wants to interact with.
And their decision has been remarkably consistent. They don't want us there. Over the years, people approaching the island have sometimes been met with bows and arrows. But calling the Sentinelese simply violent misses an important part of the story. From their perspective, outsiders are the ones arriving on their island. They are defending a territory they've depended on for generations. And their fear of outsiders may have a history that goes much deeper than most people realize. Because when outsiders first began trying to make contact, they didn't exactly arrive peacefully.
In the late 19th century, during British colonial rule in the Andaman Islands, a British officer named Maurice Vidal Portman led an expedition to North Sentinel Island. The objective was to find and make contact with the islanders. But what happened next became one of the darkest chapters in the history of contact with the Sentinelese. The expedition eventually found an elderly couple and several children. They were taken away from the island and brought to Port Blair. And then something terrible happened. The adults became seriously ill and died. The children were eventually returned to North Sentinel with gifts. Survivalinternational.org. We don't know exactly what happened afterward, but imagine what that encounter could have looked like from the islanders' perspective. strangers arrive by sea. They take members of your community away. Those people return after being exposed to an entirely different population, and some of them have died. For a people with little or no immunity to many common
And suddenly, the mystery surrounding this island becomes much bigger. Because perhaps the most important question isn't, why are the Sentinelese so hostile? Perhaps we should be asking, what happened to other indigenous peoples after outsiders made contact with them? That question would eventually change the way governments approached North Sentinel Island. And it would lead to a remarkable decision. Instead of forcing the Sentinelese to become part of the outside world would eventually decide to leave them alone. But getting to that decision would take decades. And during those decades, there would be encounters that completely changed what we thought we knew about the people living on this mysterious island. That is where the story gets even stranger.
For decades, attempts to approach North Sentinel had produced almost no understanding of what was happening beyond its forest. Then, in January 1991, something happened that researchers had almost never seen before. The Sentinelese did something unexpected. They approached the outsiders. An Indian anthropological team led by S.A. Awaradi, with researchers including anthropologist Madhumala Chattopadhyay, arrived near the island. They stayed offshore and moved toward the beach in a small boat. The people on the shore carried weapons, but instead of attacking, they allowed the visitors to come closer. The researchers floated coconuts toward them, and the Sentinelese collected them. For a brief moment, the invisible wall between two completely different worlds seemed to disappear.
And this wasn't just a single moment. During several encounters around 1990 and 1991, researchers observed groups of Sentinelese coming toward the shoreline and accepting gifts. Some appeared curious, some watched cautiously, and some simply stood nearby with weapons, as if reminding the visitors that curiosity had limits. But the researchers never managed to have a normal conversation with them. Their language remained largely incomprehensible to outsiders. There was no dictionary, no translator, no shared system of communication. The visitors could offer coconuts, but they couldn't ask the people on the beach something as simple as, "What do you call your island?" And that tiny communication barrier reveals just how isolated the community had remained. Then came 2004. One of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded struck beneath the Indian Ocean. The earthquake triggered a massive tsunami that devastated coastal regions across the Indian Ocean. Waves reached the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, including North Sentinel. From the outside, there was a terrifying question. Had the Sentinelese survived? Nobody could simply land on the island and check, so authorities sent a helicopter to investigate. As it flew over the island, someone appeared from the forest. A bow was raised. An arrow was fired toward the helicopter. It was a remarkable sight, not because the arrow could seriously threaten the aircraft, but because it answered the question the outside world had been asking. They were alive. But there was something even more remarkable about that moment. The tsunami had changed the coastline, yet the community had apparently survived one of the most destructive natural disasters in modern history. Their knowledge of the island, their relationship with the forest, and their ability to live from the surrounding environment may have helped them endure conditions that would have been devastating to a modern settlement. And suddenly, North Sentinel wasn't simply an island that had avoided civilization. It was an example of a community that had survived without depending on the systems surrounding it. No supermarkets, no hospitals, no electricity grid, no emergency evacuation, no outside rescue team entering the island. Just the island, the ocean, and the knowledge passed from one generation to the next.
But only 2 years later, the island would produce another shocking encounter. In January 2006, 2 fishermen illegally entered the restricted waters around North Sentinel while fishing. Their boat drifted toward the island. They never came back. The incident became one of the clearest reminders that the Sentinelese were not interested in turning occasional peaceful encounters into permanent contact. And this time, there would be no misunderstanding about what had happened. The fishermen were dead. Their bodies were later seen on the beach. Authorities faced an impossible decision. Should they send people onto the island to recover the bodies, or should they stay away? They chose not to risk a confrontation.
And this was the moment the outside world was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes, leaving people alone may be the safest form of protection. Because every encounter carries 2 dangers. The Sentinelese could be harmed by outsiders, and outsiders could be harmed by the Sentinelese. But there was another threat that couldn't be seen with the naked eye: disease. A common infection to us could potentially become devastating to a population with limited exposure to outside pathogens. So the question was no longer simply, how do we reach them? It became, should we reach them at all? And then, in 2018, one man decided he already knew the answer. He would attempt to enter North Sentinel Island anyway. And what happened next would turn this tiny island into a global headline. By 2018, North Sentinel Island had become one of the most protected places on Earth. The Indian government had made the rules clear. The island was a tribal reserve, and the surrounding waters were restricted. But thousands of kilometers away, a young American missionary had become obsessed with reaching the people who lived there. His name was John Allen Chow. He was 26 years old. And unlike researchers who had approached the island carefully from a distance, Chow had a very different objective. He wanted to make direct contact with the Sentinelese and convert them to Christianity. National Geographic. He knew the island was protected. He knew outsiders were not supposed to enter. And he knew the people had repeatedly resisted contact. Yet he decided to go anyway.
Chow didn't simply arrive at the island by accident. He reportedly arranged for local fishermen to take him toward North Sentinel while disguising the journey as a fishing trip. According to Indian government records, the fishermen were paid approximately 25,000 rupees for the trip. On November 14, 2018, they left Port Blair. By the early hours of the next day, they were near the Forbidden Island. Chow then transferred into a kayak and began paddling toward the shore. Alone.
What happened next sounds almost like a scene from a thriller. As Chow approached the beach, the Sentinelese saw him. They did not welcome him. An arrow was fired toward him. It struck the waterproof Bible he was carrying. Chow immediately retreated. He had received the message, "Do not come closer." But instead of turning around permanently, he decided to try again.
That night, Chow returned. This time, he went back without the protection of the fishing boat waiting nearby. The fishermen later reported seeing him approach the island again. Then, he disappeared from their view. They waited, but he didn't return. The following day, they saw something disturbing from a distance. A body appeared to be dragged toward the beach. The fishermen believed it was Chow. Later reports indicated that the Sentinelese had buried his body on the island. Indian authorities then faced an extraordinary problem. They knew approximately where the body was. They knew who had taken him there. But recovering the body would mean sending outsiders into a protected territory occupied by people who had repeatedly made their opposition to intrusion unmistakable. so authorities decided not to attempt a conventional recovery operation. The death shocked the world, but beneath the headlines was a much more complicated question. Was this simply the story of a man who ignored a warning? Or was it the collision between two completely different ideas of what the world should be? Chow believed the Sentinelese needed to hear a message from the outside world. The Sentinelese had spent generations showing that they wanted the opposite. They wanted the outside world to stay outside. And that distinction matters, because North Sentinel Island isn't a mysterious abandoned place waiting for someone brave enough to explore it. There are people living there. People who have their own society, their own relationships, their own traditions, and their own right to decide whether they want contact. And there is another reason the story cannot simply be reduced to bravery and danger. Disease. Imagine a population that has had very little exposure to common illnesses circulating among billions of people. A visitor doesn't need to attack them to cause harm. A cough, a virus, or an infection that seems ordinary to us could potentially become devastating to a small, isolated population. That is why India's current approach is essentially eyes on, hands off. Authorities monitor the island and enforce the exclusion zone while avoiding unnecessary contact. The goal isn't to conquer the island, study its people, or force them into modern society. The goal is to protect their right to remain isolated. And perhaps that's the biggest misunderstanding about North Sentinel. People often ask, why don't we just go there and find out everything about them? But maybe not knowing is part of protecting them. We don't know their exact population. We don't know their language. We don't know their complete history. We don't know what they believe. And we certainly don't know everything that happens beyond those trees. But perhaps we don't have to, because there are very few places left on Earth where a human community can simply say, "Leave us alone," and have the rest of the world, at least officially, listen. But there's still one final mystery. If the Sentinelese have survived for thousands of years, through storms, tsunamis, colonial expansion, and the arrival of the modern world, how exactly have they managed to survive? And what can we actually learn about a society that has remained almost completely outside the world we know? Because the answer may reveal something far more important than the mystery of the island itself. It may reveal why leaving them alone could be the only way to save them. The more we try to understand North Sentinelese Island, the more remarkable one fact becomes clear. Almost everything we know about the Sentinelese comes from observing them from the outside. We don't have a detailed history written by them. We don't have recordings explaining their traditions. We don't have a reliable translation of their language, and we don't have researchers living among them. Instead, scientists have had to piece together clues from brief encounters, distant observations, their tools, their canoes, their shelters, and the surrounding environment. That makes the Sentinelese one of the least understood human communities on Earth. But being isolated doesn't mean being primitive. Their survival depends on knowledge that outsiders may never fully understand.
The island itself provides almost everything they need. The surrounding waters contain fish and other marine life. The forest provides wild foods and materials. And the coastline offers another important resource: coconuts. But coconuts aren't naturally abundant everywhere on North Sentinel. They are believed to have been introduced or spread there historically. And during the rare peaceful encounters with outsiders, the Sentinelese showed an obvious interest in them. That might sound like a small detail, but it demonstrates something important. They aren't simply surviving randomly. They understand their environment, recognize useful resources, and adapt what they encounter to their own way of life.
Their canoes reveal another fascinating adaptation. They are not designed for long journeys across the open ocean. Instead, they are suited to the shallow waters around the island. This makes sense when you look at their environment. North Sentinel is surrounded by coral reefs and shallow coastal waters. The reef creates a natural barrier between the island and the open sea, and that may have helped preserve the community's separation for generations. But the same reef that protects the island can also make approaching it extremely dangerous. For outsiders, it's another reason why getting close isn't as simple as sailing toward the beach.
And then there is the island's geography. North Sentinel is relatively small, yet its interior is dominated by dense tropical forest. From the air, you can see almost none of the world beneath the canopy. There could be paths, shelters, fishing areas, and entire parts of their daily lives that outsiders have never documented. And perhaps that's why the island has become such a powerful symbol of isolation. Not because nobody knows where it is. We know exactly where it is. It's because knowing where someone lives doesn't mean you have the right to enter their home.
Today, India continues to protect the Sentinelese through strict restrictions. The entire island and its surrounding coastal waters remain protected. Patrols help prevent outsiders from approaching. And the policy is deliberately different from the way researchers traditionally studied isolated communities. There is no attempt to establish permanent contact, no tourist expeditions, no commercial development, no ordinary scientific fieldwork inside the island. The message is simple. Their isolation is not an invitation to investigate. It is a condition that authorities are trying to protect.
And that brings us to one of the most uncomfortable questions surrounding North Sentinel Island. Should humanity try to learn more about them? Or should we accept that some knowledge comes with a price? And that price may be the survival of the people we are trying to study. For centuries, outsiders often believed isolated communities needed to be discovered, documented, converted, or brought into modern society. Today, the thinking has changed. For communities that actively reject contact, the most ethical response may be distance. Not because they are dangerous monsters, not because they are frozen in the past, but because they are human beings who have repeatedly demonstrated that they want to determine their own future.
And perhaps that's the final mystery of North Sentinel. One of the most closely watched islands on Earth may also be one of the places we should know the least about. We may never know exactly what happens beneath its forest. We may never understand every word of its language. We may never know how they describe their own history. And maybe that's okay. Because sometimes the greatest discovery isn't finding a way in. It's understanding why we should stay out. But there is still one question left. What happens to North Sentinel in the future? As the outside world becomes more connected, as technology gets closer, and as the pressure to explore every remaining corner of Earth continues, can this tiny island remain isolated forever? That is the question we have to answer in the final part.
North Sentinel Island has survived something that very few places on Earth have. It has remained almost completely outside modern civilization. While the world around it changed, empires rose and disappeared, technology transformed human life, and billions of people became connected through phones and the internet, the Sentinelese continued living according to their own way of life. And now, perhaps the biggest threat to that existence isn't an army or a government or even another expedition. It's the modern world itself. Technology has made almost every corner of our planet easier to reach.
Satellites can photograph the island from space. Aircraft can fly over it. Boats can reach its surrounding waters. And the internet has turned North Sentinel into a global curiosity. Millions of people can now see images of the island without ever going near it. But that creates an unusual paradox. The more interested the world becomes in North Sentinel, the more important it becomes to leave it alone. Tourists may want to see it. Adventurers may want to reach it. Researchers may want answers. And curious people may want to know what exists behind the trees. But every unnecessary visit creates a potential danger.
And that's why India's current policy is so unusual. The Sentinelese don't need to prove that they are civilized enough to deserve protection. They don't need to agree to scientific research. And they don't need to explain their decision to remain isolated. The law protects the island and its surrounding waters. The responsibility falls on everyone else to respect the boundary. That doesn't mean the Sentinelese will never change. Every human society changes. Their descendants may make different choices in the future. Perhaps one day they will decide to establish contact. Perhaps they won't. But that decision should belong to them.
And maybe this is what makes North Sentinel Island so extraordinary. It isn't mysterious because aliens landed there. It isn't mysterious because supernatural forces protect it. And it isn't mysterious because nobody knows where it is. We know where it is. We simply don't know everything that happens there. And that is rare. In an age where almost everything can be photographed, mapped, recorded, and uploaded to the internet, there is still a place where an entire human society exists largely beyond our understanding.
So, will North Sentinel Island remain untouched forever? Nobody knows. Climate change could alter its coastline. Rising seas could affect its environment. Technology will continue to advance, and the world will continue becoming more connected. But one thing is certain. The Sentinelese have already survived centuries of outside pressure. And today, their best chance of surviving into the future may be surprisingly simple. Let them remain where they are.
North Sentinel Island may remain one of the few places on Earth where we don't have all the answers. We may never know exactly how many people live there. We may never fully understand their language. We may never hear their complete history. And we may never know what lies beyond the forest. But perhaps that's not a failure. Perhaps respecting the unknown is the point. Because sometimes, the most extraordinary place isn't the one we manage to explore. It's the one we have enough wisdom to leave untouched. If this story made you look at the world differently, subscribe to Beyond Maps. Here, we don't just tell you what's already familiar. We go looking for the places, discoveries, and stories that make you stop and say, I never knew this existed. If you found this documentary fascinating, share it with someone who loves discovering the hidden side of our world. Because there are still countless stories out there, waiting to be discovered. This is Beyond Maps, and there's always more beyond the map.